everybody. Hi, my name is Federica Manfredi and I'm a PhD student at the Institute of Social Sciences at the University of Lisbon. And this video is my presentation for the 16th EASA Congress and specifically for the panel 91, Body-Mind as Spaces of Struggle and Experiment, Exploration, Expansions and Experiences of Human Limits. My presentation, Hunting for Regeneration, is based on the ethnographical data of my ongoing doctoral project, which is dedicated to body suspensions and the exploration of meanings associated to it. I believe that body suspensions well fit the call of the panel, which is dedicated to body and spiritual practices, expanding human limits and abilities. And exactly in this sense, body suspensions implicate an alteration of the perceptive abilities of the body. In this sense of empowering humanity, I would like also to mention a research project named Excel. You have here a link if you want to know more about it. It is led by Chiara Pussetti at the ICS of the University of Lisbon. And Excel, the Pursuit of Excellence, is a study aiming to explore the use of no therapeutic enhancement technologies that people use in order to empower themselves. And in this sense, body suspensions are volunteer, self-made body modifications, no therapeutic, performed in order to be better humans, to feel better, to regenerate it, the self, and be enhanced. So, what a body suspension is? A suspension can be many things, but from a mechanical point of view, it is the elevation of a human body through hooks temporarily inserted in the skin as piercings. And here you have an example of hooks. Hooks are later linked to an above scaffolding called rig through ropes. And pulling the main one, there is the elevation of the body. Of course, the number of hooks and their positioning depends on the figure that the protagonist wants to realize and also to his or her level of expertise. Before to show you in which sense body suspensions expand human limits and are narrated as a strategy to go beyond human limits, I would like to frame my research. So the title is Learning to Fly. For this title, I have to thank Hove Gel for the kind concession in letting me use the title of one of his publications dedicated to body suspensions. And where people gather in order to perform suspensions. That's my field work. There are, in one hand, international gatherings called SASCONs. They are 3-4 days festivals where 100 of people gather, and they are very common in Italy and in Norway, where they have an annual base since 20 years now. In the other hand, I decided also to focus on Portugal because there the body suspension culture is in a rising state, and and there are not big suspension festivals, but rather a lot of little daily suspension events with 5-10 participants maximum. So it was in a comparative and multi-sited approach that I decided to experience my fieldwork. And beyond these places, I also decided to include Facebook pages, because in Facebook pages, practitioners keep in touch in between an event and another one, and they were expanded site of my investigation. In the title of the dissertation, the subtitle actually, A Transspatial Ethnography, I want to stress my focus on the circulation of people, meanings, ideas, emotions, practices, and materials related to body suspensions across spaces, through spaces actually, online and offline. So, In a phenomenological approach, I embraced a qualitative methodology with the semi-structured interview, participant observations online and offline, reconstructions of story life. But I faced a big problem during my research because many times people told me that it was too hard to talk about suspension. There were no words to describe what a suspension was. So, because of this, I invite them in a creative laboratory where I invited people to create handcrafts using metaphors in order to express themselves. And this strategy let us go in a co-produced process that went beyond logocentric logic and empowered the self-narrative strategies, visualizing and materializing idea. And handcrafts became reference for the oral communications. So the both were empowered by the other category. So, as I was saying, this was the result of my adaptation to the pain, because pain at the beginning was very hard to investigate. Of course it hurts, but there is so much more beyond pain. In this excerpt, that's interesting to see that pain is not conceived as a sufferance, is not opposite to the category of well-being. Pain and well-being actually have a much more complicated relationship. They are in harmony and codependency in my data, and this concept took a lot for me to be understood. So pain is required, and it's a mandatory step in order to disclose extraordinary experiences. Pain actually allowed the manipulation of the perceptive abilities, which are also narrated as trance experiences, altered state of mind, trip, altered state of consciousness, as they were described by Georges Lapassade. So the goal of the suspension is not the pain, is the manipulation of the ordinary perceptions ability, and this goal is achieved through pain. What about how people present suspension? How do they explain what they live? How they explain this alteration of perception? They talk about ecstatic state. This slide comes from my fieldwork. During an international gathering, a VIP member of the community was invited to deliver a lecture, and this lecture focused actually in the suspension and the trance experience that very often people narrate in association to suspensions. And so the ecstatic state was explained using the brainwave theory. Additionally to this explanatory model, people especially during interviews, were used to mention the overstimulation of adrenaline and endorphin. So an hormonal overstimulation was narrated as responsible for the beginning of the trance experience. It is very interesting for me because there are no scientific evidences, but this explanatory endemic model is shared inside the entire suspension community. So let's see how the trance experience is narrated and in which sense the suspensions expand human limits. In this interview, the nature is narrated in opposition of humanity, because he said, flying is not part of our kind. At the same time, the pole in other interviews is narrated as a pole to tend, a pole of inspiration in order to be better forms of human, to be more human actually. In the final part of this interview, when you reconnect with the world and your feet come down, you feel that something is ended and something else is ready to start. And this is clearly a reference to the suspension as a rite of passage, and the reconnection with the flow coincide with a regeneration, a new phase after a liminal state. In this second interview, the person was again mentioning the adrenaline as an explanatory model for what happened. And at the beginning, she said that I should try a suspension because it's hard to say what is it. So this you should try happened a lot of time for me during the fieldwork to hear. It's I always perceive it as a shortcut. If I had this impression. If I decided to suspend, people would imply a lot of meanings during our interview. So, first of all, I do not feel that I'm ready for this kind of suspensions, for this kind of experience. They don't belong to me, even if they are for sure a big interest, and I decided to put it at the center of my doctoral project. But I also understood that if I would embrace it, people would imply a lot of meanings, and instead I wanted to push my informant to be very elementary with me and do not forget anything just because we were sharing the experience. So then she mentioned the empty, that her mind is full and empty at the same time. This metaphor, I had the impression that the metaphor was trying to show me what the trance sensations meaning for her, where the fullness is the overstimulation and the emptiness is the absence of sensory inputs, and both these conditions are out of the ordinary perceptive abilities. Plus, she said that it's magic, but it's you making the magic. It's your body and your state that make it possible. So this is the reference to the responsibility of the person, active agent of the process. And it's also the recognition of the merit, the credit for the achievement of the experience, which correspond also to an empowerment. So these two interviews that I selected are very similar in the description of what a suspension is, and I can assure you that people don't know each other and they come from different continents. So this means that inside the body suspension community there is a uniform way to signify meanings related to body suspensions. In the last part of this interview, it's interesting also to note a reference to the social dimension, because the perception is not only altered in connection with the self, but also with the environment, which is intended as the nature sometimes, but also the social environment, so the other people. Not only those attending the suspension events, but also those that are at home and that characterize our everyday life. So the suspension is an experience that lets you change your perception of the everyday life, including the people that are part of it. So the pain is something that can be controlled and used to alter the ordinary perception of the self, of the other, and of the environment. In this slide, you can see a triptych that was painted by Martina during the creative laboratory that I was mentioning in the introduction of this presentation. She decided to work on the power of the suspension using the metaphor of the butterfly. So she was stressing the transformation that she experienced during the suspensions, and then she decided to perform exactly the suspension that she portrayed in the triptych. The nature, also in this case, is used in order to show the transformation, and it's very interesting that not only in this case, but in many cases, handcrafts were referring to nature, but using very different meanings. So, suspensions are understood as exploration of limits, trans experience explained with the hormonal manipulation. They regenerate people that actually face a self-challenge in order to perform a suspension, and the duality of mind and body is used in order to explain what happens. So here I selected some other examples of the creative laboratory. Many of them are referring to the nature. And for example, in this case, here the chain is representing the everyday life problems that, thanks to the suspensions, are transformed in flowers, so in something positive. So, concluding, I felt that it was interesting to show that suspensions are strategy to manipulate in a self-poetical approach, according to Francesco Remotti theory of anthropology. They are strategy to manipulate the perceptive abilities, and in this self-experience projectuality, the actions are not only directed on the self but also to the others and to the environment. Pain is not the goal, it's the tool in order to achieve this result, and pain and suffering are very different things. Pain and well-being so can be closer than what we imagined. So thank you very much for your attention. In case of questions or curiosity, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.